everyone for joining. A warm welcome to everyone, those of you who I know and those of you who are meeting for the first time. My name is Maria Sjödin. I'm Deputy Director at OuRight, where I've been for about 7 years when I moved from my home country of Sweden to start working at OuRight headquarters in New York City. We're so grateful that you have joined us today to learn more about our new Outstanding Legacy Circle. And I'm very excited that we're launching this year in our 30th anniversary year. It feels very fitting. And many of you have been supporters of OuRight for a long time. Thank you so much. We wouldn't have made it to our 30th anniversary if it hadn't been for you. And those of you who are new, I'll give a very brief little introduction to OuRight. I mean, we have been a human rights organization for 30 years. We were founded in San Francisco. And I must say, I've known about OuRight, that some of you know, used to be known as the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission for a long time. And I must say the organization is in an incredibly strong place today. We're very fortunate to have some incredible board leadership, and some of you whom you will be meeting here today. And launching this Outstanding Legacy Circle, it's really bringing together a special group of donors who believe in the global movement for LGBTIQ rights and for the recognition of LGBTIQ people across the globe, knowing that it will take a long time before we get to the kind of world where we ideally would all want to live already. And so we're launching this program a little bit more formally. We've obviously had donors and supporters who have included us in their planned giving before, but we want to make it a little bit more formalized. And also, of course, we want to invite new people to join the Outstanding Legacy Circle. I mean, over the 30 years that OuRight has been around, there's been a lot of improvement. When I say that 67 countries today criminalize same-sex relations, that is horrible. It means that consenting adults aren't free to have the relationships that they want. They aren't free to love who they want. But 30 years ago, it was close to 100 countries. So things are definitely improving. But there is a long way left to go. There is the criminalization, discrimination, persecution. There's only 4 or 5 countries in the world that currently ban so-called conversion therapies. And we know that that is a phenomenon that happens in a lot of, in many parts of the world. So we really need to keep fighting. And, you know, I'm looking forward to OuRight's 60th anniversary, if I'm still around by then, because, you know, we'll have seen a lot more progress in the coming decades, but we can only do it when we have supporters like you who stand with us and really take a stance. And we've seen it obviously this year with the COVID-19 pandemic. A pandemic, I mean, it's in the definition of the word. It reaches the whole world. It affects everyone. But what we have really seen is it disproportionately affects the people who are already marginalized. Some of you know that OuRight launched our COVID emergency fund. And I have to say, for me personally, in the 7 years I've been with OuRight, it's maybe the one thing that I'm proud of many things, but it's maybe the one thing that I'm the most proud of. To date, we have supported 121 organizations with support from the emergency fund. And I mean, we have raised over $1 million. We're the largest global LGBTIQ COVID fund. And we've really made a big difference in the lives of many individuals. And so we couldn't have done that without your support. And before I turn it over to the panel, I just want to say also one more announcement about our Outstanding Legacy Circle. So Paul Albert, who is on this call, he is, I think, the one donor in our database that shows up as the person who has donated every single year for OuRight's existence. So we have many long-term donors, and some of you are joining us here in this call. We're proud of all of you, but I really think it's special to have really managed to donate every single year. And so Paul really wanted us to accelerate the launch of this legacy program. So he put up a challenge for us and a great opportunity. He will contribute $1,000 per person for each new donor who joins our Outstanding Legacy Circle by letting us know that they have included us in their estate plans, up to 30 donors. And for us, this is a great challenge because, of course, we see a lot of opportunity. If we can get 30 new donors and get to 30,000, that's money in the bank right now that we can do great work with. And it's really been, thank you so much, Paul. It's really been a great challenge for us and really sort of accelerated us getting this up and running. Now I'd really want to turn over to my friend and colleague, Russell Roybal, who is Development Committee Chair at OuRight, and in his day job is the Chief Advancement Officer of the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. And he is such a great asset to the organization. So Russell, please take over and take it from here.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you everyone for being here today. I want to welcome you on behalf of the board of OuRight, and it's great to see some old friends on, like Emily Rosenberg, who has known me since I was only about half as high as I am now, and has supported lots of the organizations that I've been a part of. It's great to see you, and Darlene, Emily. And I'm just so excited to be here today and to share the launch of the Outstanding Legacy Circle with everyone. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping and say, just if you have a question that comes up during any of our conversation today, please feel free to put it in the chat and we will make sure to get to it. I'm really excited to be with our panel of experts, all of whom are proud supporters of OuRight. And I just want to thank all the panelists for supporting this amazing organization that literally does work around the globe. And so I want to do a quick introduction of each of our panelists. And then when we get into some of the prepared questions, I'd like each of the panelists to start by saying why they support OuRight. So I want to start by introducing Sarah Anderson, who's a VP at Campbell and Company. Sarah's an expert in LGBT giving and philanthropy and helps to lead Campbell and Company's Northwest team. Sarah's worked extensively with nonprofit organizations across the country to align their messaging and fundraising to boost giving. So welcome, Sarah. Next is Deb Kinney, who's of counsel at Johnston, Kinney, and Zulaica, LLP, a law firm providing comprehensive estate planning, trust administration, probate services, and family law. Deb has worked tirelessly on behalf of the LGBT community regarding income, property, and estate tax issues. Welcome, Deb. Next, Peter McAweeney. After 25 years as a corporate litigator in San Francisco, handling large, complex litigation matters, Peter now practices exclusively in the area of trusts, wills, and estates, including estate planning, trust administration, and probate. Peter and his husband, Todd Hill, a former board member of OuRight, are proud members of OuRight's Outstanding Legacy Circle. Next, so welcome, Peter. Next is Dipti Ghosh. Dipti is a longtime community activist living in San Francisco and has recently retired after 34 years as a senior VP in the financial services industry. Her activism has involved work on women's rights and LGBT rights, especially in the Asian American community. Dipti is a past chair of the board of OuRight, and her and her partner Maggie are also proud members of the Outstanding Legacy Circle. And then finally, I want to welcome Dipti. I want to welcome Tom Watson. Tom is a retired advertising executive and former HIV social worker. Tom has volunteered as a fundraiser for OuRight, a courtroom advocate for victims of domestic violence, and a dog handler at no-kill animal rescues. Tom is also a proud member of OuRight's Outstanding Legacy Circle. So thank you, Tom, and welcome to all the panelists. So our goals today are really to share information about the Outstanding Legacy Circle, to give some context about giving in the LGBTQ community, to share some basics around planned giving and answer your questions, and then share some personal stories from our donors who have already joined the Outstanding Legacy Circle. We're gonna spend the next about half hour asking some questions that I hope will be interesting and inspiring to all of you. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to include them in the chat. We've also placed the bios of each of the speakers in the chat. So if everybody's ready to get started, let's begin. I also want to note that I am also a member of the Outstanding Legacy Circle, and it was really from donors like you that I have worked with and learned from over my career in the LGBT community that has really inspired me to be more proactive in my giving. Certainly, I mentioned Emily and Darlene earlier. Emily has always been a donor role model of mine, so I'm so excited that our panel is going to be sharing this information with you today. So let's get started with a bit of context. And so the first question I have is for Sarah. Sarah, you've done a ton of research and work in our field in terms of collecting information about philanthropy in the LGBTIQ community and specifically around planned giving. Could you share some of the highlights with us? What do we know about LGBTIQ donors and giving to the movement? And what do we know about planned giving in our community? Sarah.
Thanks, Russell. Happy to share a bit. And I'll start by talking a little bit about my introduction to OuRight, which I may be one of the newer supporters of OuRight on the call today, because I was just introduced to the organization by a close friend earlier this year. In fact, the event that was hosted here in Seattle was one of the last events that I went to in person before lockdown started. So I have very fond memories of being together with people and having a really nice time supporting OuRight. I was really struck by the breadth of OuRight's work, quite literally saving lives around the world, and just really appreciated getting to know the organization a little bit better. As Russell mentioned, I've done a lot of research on LGBT giving and giving within our community. I'm a fundraising consultant to nonprofits, and one of the projects that I was involved with over the last couple of years has been the LGBT Giving Project, which included a specific task force looking at planned giving within the LGBTQ community, and have really just enjoyed both getting to know more about LGBTQ donors giving, as well as the organizations that are within our movement and the ways that they approach and engage donors. In addition to my own research, my wife is also a professor who studies giving and identity with a focus on gender and LGBTQ giving. So some of the information that I'll be drawing on in my remarks is also from a national study that she led on planned giving last year, which included specific analysis of LGBTQ donors. So we're a little bit insufferable when you get us together and we start talking about giving and philanthropy, because we both just are so deep in it, but it's a lot of fun. So to Russell's questions, a couple of highlights about what we know to sort of set the context of giving and planned giving in particular within the LGBTQ community. One of the things that we know is that the average age at which the general population establishes their first planned gift is 53 years old. And about half of people establish that gift when they write their first will, but others often add a planned gift later when they either revise or update their wills, or they establish a gift through another type of vehicle. However, LGBTQ donors tend to make their first planned gift quite a bit earlier, at the average age of 50, which maybe doesn't sound that much earlier. It's only 3 years, but statistically significant. And it's interesting that does happen earlier. I think one of the reasons that we've often seen or are kind of considered as a reason for that is many of us up until a few years ago didn't have federal recognition for our marriages, maybe lived in states where our rights were not as protected. And so estate planning provided not just important protection, but really essential protection for our families. My wife and I established our first wills in our 20s, which felt kind of a little bit like really adulting compared to some of our straight friends who didn't need to do that because their marriages were recognized at the time. So we also know that LGBTQ individuals and couples are significantly less likely to have children. Nearly 2/3 of LGBTQ folks don't have children, although that gap is narrowing a bit compared to the general population. And we know that not having children is one of the biggest predictors of leaving a charitable gift. Folks who don't have kids are 3 times more likely than those who do have kids to make a planned gift. And we see that really reflected in the data about, that folks in our community have really opted to support organizations that they care about through, their estate plans or other forms of planned gifts. Or if they haven't done it yet, they're quite open to it. In a national survey that was done through the LGBT Giving Project, 16% of LGBTQ donors said that they had already committed to making a planned gift to an LGBTQ organization. And another 35% said that they would be likely to do that. And 16% might sound like a small number, but if you look at the general population, only 5% of folks in the US have made a planned gift commitment to a charitable organization. So that number is significantly higher within our LGBTQ community, I think in part because of that point about not having children and just really having that affinity and that strong identity and connection to LGBTQ organizations that have made such an impact and a difference in our lives. So we know that LGBTQ donors are significantly more likely to establish bequests, to have a charitable trust, or to have a donor advised fund compared to the general population. And they're also more likely to increase the number of planned gifts that we've committed to, or the value of those gifts over time. So kind of going back and revising and updating plans to include more charitable organizations or to increase the value of those during the course of our lives. And in general, this isn't specific to planned giving, but we also know that LGBTQ donors were more likely to support advocacy efforts than the general population. We're more motivated by work that is seeking to end discrimination and persecution, as Maria was speaking to, work that addresses violence and hate crimes. And really, I think one of the things that came through in some of the messaging research that we did with the LGBT Giving Project was this strong motivation to fulfill that spirit of giving somebody else an easier path than we ourselves might have had. And I think that speaks so much to the work that OuRight does and is really true to some of what motivates and inspires donors within our community specifically. So that's just a little bit of kind of context around what we've seen and what my wife and I have seen in our research in various endeavors. And Russell, appreciate the question, and we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for all that amazing information. I want to now move on to Deb and Peter to share some of your own insights about why estate planning is important from a client perspective, and perhaps highlight a few common plan giving strategies that donors may be interested in. And then also, have you seen any unique trends with some of your LGBTIQ clients? And I just want to give a little testimonial. I actually saw Deb speak about a year and a half ago, maybe. And after that conversation and some information she shared, I actually changed around what I was doing around my giving. So thank you, Deb, for that insight. Deb and Peter.
You're welcome. So I'm Deb Kinney, and I'm in San Francisco. I've known a lot of the San Francisco OuRight management contingent over the years. I've worked with many LGBT organizations over the years, and there tends to be a group of very active donors and givers and movers and shakers. And if you go to enough cocktail parties and events, you get to really get to know them. So OuRight's been a ton of fun, and always I very much respect the work that's been done worldwide. It's amazing to see activists come together and push governments to behave better from the outside and to really save lives. OuRight does that in a way that is different from our local LGBT organizations, I think, because as tough as we've had it, it seems like it's been much more dire internationally than it has been in the United States in the last 40 or 50 years. So thanks to all of you from OuRight who are doing the real hard on the ground work for our brothers and sisters worldwide. I founded a firm in downtown San Francisco. It's probably the largest estate planning firm in San Francisco. And we've always had an emphasis in the LGBT community. So Sarah, I was super happy to hear your new statistics, because for years I knew that there was 5% of givers. I've had a philosophy of asking every single client who walks in whether or not they want to make a charitable gift. And I've only had, probably over the 20 plus years of doing this, 3 or 4 people who looked at me totally askance and thought I was being too forward. Other than that, people have been grateful to have those conversations, because so few people bring it up and explain how easy it is to do both, and to both take care of the people in your life that you want and to leave a gift to the community. So we've had incredible success moving people, as Sarah explained, from younger ages as they grow older to bigger gifts, and to really thinking about the impact and legacy that they want to leave in the world. And you don't have to have kids to leave a legacy. You just have to have some ideas, honestly. So I want to just start with a very broad overview, and then Peter's going to go into the nuts and bolts. And just kind of do a recap, because we're post-election, and despite the news every day, we do know who the next president is going to be. And we also know that we have an economic situation in this country that's untenable. And the difference between the haves and the have-nots is going to drive some economic policy, undoubtedly. So currently we have about an $11.5 million estate tax exemption in the United States. And that means that's the amount of money that you can gift or leave to anybody with paying no estate taxes. Now, because they couldn't get Congress to pass the new law with a 2/3 vote, that will sunset in 2025. However, given the new administration, there's a good chance that they'll try and take a poke at the estate tax exemption within the next few years. If they don't get the Senate, it's not going to happen. All right. So there's been financial advisors going, oh, you have to do your planning. You have to go look at everything. Biden's in town, Democrats, and it's not quite that easy. However, I do think that for good public policy, we will be seeing a lowering of the estate tax. And just as a quick aside, it only came into being when the concentration of wealth in the United States was so great that there was no other way to redistribute wealth. It was the Carnegies, the Mellons, the Rockefellers who owned so much, and the rest of the country didn't. So the estate tax currently only affects 0.01% of the population. If it goes back down to $5.5 or $6 million, it'll affect 0.02% of the population. All right. So it's not as horrific as one thinks. Now, those of us who've been fortunate enough to live in the Bay Area or New York or Seattle and have made some money, it may very well affect us. And we have a choice. You have a choice between 3 things. 1, friends and family. 2, government. 3, charity. If you have a taxable estate or are going to have a taxable estate, pick 2 out of the 3. And you can either send it to Washington or you can send it to OuRight. I mean, it's a pretty easy choice when you start thinking about it that way. So people, that's one thing. The other thing I want to mention is, despite the Supreme Court makeup, I do not think that our marriages will be invalidated. I do not think that we'll see a rollback to the point where we are left without the magic wands of tax benefits that we gain through the power of marriage, if any of you are married. So I'd be super surprised if it got to that. So I don't think there's, the sky's not falling yet. And so you're in a really great time to do some very thoughtful planning. And despite or no matter what your wealth may be, small, medium, or large, we do have a philosophy that there's always enough for everybody. So I think the next thing I just want to talk about a little bit, I think Tom brought this up earlier on a call that we had, was a little bit about the difference between a will and a trust. And Sarah, you referred to people starting to do their planned giving when they kind of execute their first will, and they've started to think about these things, right? Most of us don't want to go around thinking about the day we're going to die earlier than we have to. And in some states, wills are fine. In New Jersey, it takes about $15 and 15 minutes to probate a will. But in many states, especially like California, the last thing you want to rely upon is a will. A will guarantees that you will go through the probate process. Whereas if you do a revocable living trust, you can avoid probate. You can also provide for incapacity, and you can effectively do the same things dispositively as you can do with a will, but with a lot less administration on the end and a lot less emergency if and when one becomes incapacitated. And, you know, we're living so much longer that most of us will have some term probably of incapacity before our death, despite what we wish. So having the things in place for your friends and family to be able to take care of you is a gift, not only to yourself, but a gift to them. And if there's people that you think will be wanting you to do that for them, you should make sure that they have their documents in line as well. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Peter, and then I'll have a few more comments at the end.
Thank you, Deb. So my name is Peter McAweeney. I am an estate planning attorney in Sonoma County, California, up in Cloverdale, about 2 hours north of San Francisco. And I became introduced to OuRight probably over a decade ago as a donor, primarily through my husband. My husband, Todd Hill, served on the board up until about a year ago, and he was involved with OuRight even before he was on the board. So we became early donors at that time and have continued to support OuRight, and have been I have personally been thrilled to see how the organization has really expanded its work and has become really the powerhouse organization on the world stage for our community. And every year it seems to have a greater outreach. So it's been our privilege to be able to become legacy donors for OuRight. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple things. One is the importance of having an estate plan particularly if you have charitable intent in your gifting when you pass away. If you don't have a will or a trust, no estate plan in place when you die, your estate will go through probate most likely, and it will be governed by the intestate rules of the state in which you reside. And those are state statutory rules that will determine how your estate gets distributed. And they do not benefit charity. So if you have a charitable intent, you will not have your charitable intent fulfilled if you do not have a estate plan. The intestate succession rules are meant to benefit only family members. So if you want to benefit friends as opposed to just family members, or if you have a charitable intent in your gifting, you're going to really want to make sure you have an estate plan in place, whether it's a will or a trust. And as Deb said, most people now are going the route of having a trust because of the ability to avoid probate and the cost and the time consumption that involves. But in addition to wills and trusts, there are other vehicles that you can use for your charitable giving. One vehicle are your retirement accounts. So if during your lifetime you establish a trust, you're not going to put your retirement accounts into the trust for tax reasons. You suffer negative tax consequences if you were to transfer while you're living your retirement accounts into your trust. So what that means is that your trust will not dictate, the distribution provisions of your trust will not determine how your retirement assets are going to be distributed. That will be determined by your beneficiary designations that you set up with your retirement accounts. And you can have primary beneficiaries and contingent beneficiaries. For married people, their primary beneficiaries are typically their spouse. It doesn't have to be your spouse. but many people are using their retirement accounts to make charitable gifts when they die. So they'll designate charitable organizations like OuRight as the beneficiary of their retirement accounts. And the reason that people will do that, if they, for instance, if they have an intent to benefit family members or friends, and they also have charitable intent, they're going to want to use their retirement accounts primarily to benefit charities. And the reason for that is that retirement accounts are tax-deferred accounts. So the beneficiaries of the retirement accounts are going to have to pay income tax on the distributions that they receive. So if you have a family member or friends who are your beneficiaries of a retirement account, when they receive those distributions, they're going to pay income tax on it. Charitable organizations, because they're tax exempt, will not have to pay income tax if they receive a distribution as a beneficiary from a retirement account. So if you have both, you have an intent to benefit charities and family members, what you're going to want to do is have your gifts to your charities primarily coming first from your retirement accounts, and for family and friends, primarily from your non-tax deferred assets that sit in your trust. And that way you can maximize your overall gifting, because the charities that receive distributions from your tax deferred retirement accounts will not have to pay income tax when they receive those benefits. So you could do, for retirement account, you could list one or more charitable organizations as a beneficiary, such as OuRight. You could also list a donor-advised fund as a beneficiary of your retirement account, and then use a memorandum of charitable intent to then provide guidance for the ultimate beneficiaries of your of those assets or those distributions that come out of the retirement accounts. And I think Deb is going to talk a little bit more about donor-advised funds in a little bit. The next vehicle I want to talk to you about are charitable remainder trusts. So charitable remainder trusts are charitable planned giving vehicles defined by federal law that allows donors to provide an income stream for themselves for a period of time, and then also make a charitable gift. And it has significant tax benefits. The trust is an irrevocable trust that has its own 501c3 status, and it's established by the donor. And the donor is typically also the trustee of the charitable trust. It usually involves the transfer of a highly appreciated asset into the trust. And then the trustee will sell that asset, but because it is a charitable entity, no capital gains tax will be have to be paid when that asset is sold. So typically, if the donor just sold that asset outright, the donor would have to pay capital gains income tax on that. By placing it into this charitable trust, when the trustee sells that asset, the trust will pay no capital gains income tax. And then the proceeds of the sale are invested in investment vehicles that then pay an annuity to the donor over a course of time, either for the lifetime of the donor or of a period of years up to 20 years. Now, the annuity is, the percentage payout on the annuity is based on actuarial tables that look at what the life expectancy of the donor and the projected investment returns over the course of time. And the percentage is set such that there will be at least 10% left at the end of the lifetime of the donor or the period of years for the charitable entity that is designated in the trust instrument. So there's a couple rules that are implicated by this. One is that the asset that you put into the charitable remainder trust has to be debt-free. So there can be, so if it's a piece of real estate, there can be no mortgage or any debt on that asset. The annuity payment, the annual payment percentage has to be at least 5%. And there has to be at least 10% left over at the end of the annuity period, whether it's the lifetime of the donor or a period of years up to 20 years. There has to be at least 10% left over for the charitable entity. This is all based on projections that are set in actuarial tables that the federal government publishes. And so if the investments of the annuity actually perform better than the actuarial tables, then the charity is going to actually get more than 10% at the end of the period of time. If the investments don't do as well, then the charity may not get that 10%. But at the time that the trust is established, there has to be an expectation based on these actuarial tables that there will be 10% left over for the charity. So an example, I think I have a little bit of time to give an example. Suppose someone were to establish a charitable remainder trust for a period of 20 years. And based on actuarial tables at the time, and this is, I'm giving a real life example for one that was set up last year. At the time, if someone set up a charitable remainder trust for a period of 20 years, the trust would pay out 11% of the value of the assets for the period of 20 years, every 20 years, 10% of the value, and there would still be 20% or 10% left over for the charitable entity. So if you invested in an asset that was worth $20 million, or say $2 million, you would get, the first year you would get 11% of that. And then over the course of time, over the 20 years of time, the annual payouts will get less and less and less unless the investments are earning more than that 11%. And then at the end of the 20 years, there'd be $200,000 left for the charitable organization like OuRight. So that's how charitable remainder trust works. And if there's any questions about that, we can take questions, I think, later on. But I want to turn it back over to Deb, who's going to talk about donor advised funds.
Hi. Oh, is my video off? No. Oh, I've got two things going. Sorry. So, so Peter, thank you. Peter's talking about when you have a highly appreciated asset that you want to divest yourself of, how to do it in a tax efficient manner that benefits both charity and again, steals money from government. So that one pays income to you, remainder to charity. There's also a charitable lead trust that pays an annuity to charity for up to 20 years, for instance, and then remainder to, and it can be to someone else. So if you want to give a niece or a nephew or somebody else a little money in 20 years, maybe they're 25 now and you have great hopes that by 45 they'll have a job and be responsible, you could actually use a charitable lead trust. So it's the inverse. But both of these things are ways to be more tax efficient in both your divestment and your giving. Donor advised funds also are a fantastic thing. And that you can do for annual giving as well as for your testamentary giving. Donor advised funds, I say, are the best things since sliced white bread. Not that I eat much white bread anymore, but they allow you to transfer assets in there, and it can be appreciated stock at this point. It can be testamentary gifts. And as Peter was explaining, you can have a way then to say, hey, I want, 50% to go OuRight, 10% to go to Horizons, 20% to go to NCLR, and the rest of it's got to go to the separation of church and state, or whatever your interest may be. And so you have a way of spreading the love is the way that I look at it. And the nice thing is you can update those percentages just by sending a new letter into the donor advised fund management company without having to go to your attorney and pay more money. Because you could still have those same things in your trust or your will, but every time you want to update, it's going to cost you something. So that's a nice way to do it. And for those of you who are over 70 and a half, you can actually transfer from your retirement account up to $100,000 a year straight into a donor advised fund or a charity and not take it as a distribution. So that's another great way to start, getting rid of what would otherwise be potentially estate taxable and income taxable assets. I mean, I've seen people end up with about 27 cents on the dollar out of retirement funds. So that's why we always say those are the first ones to give away. So that is kind of those two aspects. But if any of you are thinking about wanting to do tax efficient gifting, please reach out to your advisors because there's so many ways to do that. And if any of you don't have your charities in your trust or your will, now's a great time to start thinking about that. And remember, when you put it in, it's modifiable until the time that you either have no capacity or that you're deceased. So, if you decide you have to give more and more and more to OuRight over the years because of the great work they're doing, that's okay. You can start with a group of people. It's Russ, with the AIDS Foundation, we've been wanting for years for that to become a non-entity because there's no more reason to have it. Right. And that would be the best gift, is that the San Francisco AIDS Foundation no longer existed because we found a cure. And so then you can update your plan and say, hey, I give more to something else, because there will be things that come up over the course of our lifetime. And we just have no idea what the next disaster will be, as evidenced by all of us in 2020.
Well, thank you so much, Deb and Peter, for all that very helpful information. And now I want to move on to Dipti and Tom. Thank you both for being here today and for your long-term support of OuRight. I hope each of you could share a bit more about how you decided to include OuRight in your estate planning, why you got involved, and if you're willing to share what vehicles you've identified for your plan giving, that would be helpful too. Dipti, Tom? Oh, Dipti, you're on mute.
Okay. Tom, you want to go first?
Sure. Okay, thanks. I think when my husband and I sort of created our trust, our estate planning, we designated actually virtually all of our beneficiaries to nonprofits. And some of those decisions on when you choose an organization like OuRight and other charities, those decisions can be very personal, obviously, but they're also practical and in some ways universal. And so there were really two issues that helped define how we were going to designate our beneficiaries in our trust. And the first one was, there are many organizations that we think are meaningful and important and worthy, and we give to them every month a range of different issues. But we also realized that in death, we would probably be making our largest contribution in our lifetime. So we were very careful about choosing those beneficiaries. So the first issue was we only wanted to choose no more than 3 nonprofits so that we weren't spreading the money too thin. We really wanted to have an impact on an organization. So we purposely chose not to donate to a huge institution. I mean, obviously this varies. If you're a billionaire, you might want to give money to a large institution. I'm not a billionaire. So, but we decided we wanted to have a real impact. And OuRight was, I think, the right size. It also had been around for 30 years at the time we made this decision. And so we knew that they had been doing the work for a while, that they were experts, and there was some, real infrastructure and longevity sort of baked into OuRight. So we only chose 3 organizations. That was the first issue. The second issue that helped us sort of direct us toward giving to OuRight was long-term decisions. So while as Deb and Peter were saying, things happen and you can change your beneficiary. We really tried to have a vision of what would be relevant when we died. And optimistically, maybe we'll live another 30 years. But if we died tomorrow, it'd be an organization that would be relevant and benefit next week if we died suddenly. But also something that, an organization that would have real meaning and relevant mission 30 years from now. And at the time, we were retired a little over 5 years ago, and which is when I started volunteering for OuRight to help raise money. At that point, it felt like the United States under the Obama administration had made enormous progress for LGBTQ people in America and had global influence as well. And and particularly compared to when I was young and first came to New York City in the early 80s under the Reagan era and the AIDS epidemic was raging on, it felt like looking forward 30 years ahead and in the immediate present, an organization like OuRight was going to be necessary and important, just like any human rights organization. Human rights organizations, because of the nature of human beings, will be around for the long term because they need to be. And we thought OuRight was probably the best and most experienced, most knowledgeable human rights organization that specialized in LGBTQ people in countries and cultures around the world. So it was those two issues. It was really having impact on an organization with our donation, and then secondly, to by not spreading the money too thin, and then secondly, find an organization that would certainly be relevant. It might be transformed a bit, but certainly very relevant 30 years from now. And so while we continue to give to a variety of organizations every month, we selected a handful of beneficiaries in our trust, and OuRight being an important one. And I think that's all I had to say.
Okay. So Tom was very thoughtful and very organized about his giving. I, unfortunately, are the other end of that. I sort of have been giving to organizations when I didn't have money to give. And I feel like OutRight's, was formerly known as International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission. I've been connected to OutRight in that way for 26 years in many different capacities. And my first sort of activism thing that I did with, at that time, Eaglehawk, was take an underground film festival to India with one of the OutRight board members and another South Asian organization called Trikone, and along with Frameline giving us all the films. And we went and did an underground film festival in people's living rooms, in council, in different embassies and consul general offices, and tons of people showed up for it. And so, and today, in India, they have the South Asian queer film festivals. So being involved with an organization like OutRight has shown me this progress. I think I was around when there were 100 didn't have LGBTQ. I was organizing with OutRight at the time when there were so many countries with no LGBTQ rights at all. And in India, we had sodomy laws. They went away. We got them back, and now they've gone away again. So you just, the fact that we have an organization like OutRight doing this work, I feel makes it easier on me. I feel like I sleep better at night knowing that there are people like Katie and, and Jessica and Grace and all the folks on the staff that are keeping watch on the world and seeing to make sure that they're, getting people their rights. So for me, it was an easy decision that, OutRight was going to be part of my legacy giving. And we give annually to a lot of organizations. But again, you know, it's that thing where we're procrastinators. And in December, we're always looking to see, like, you know, I'm writing these furious checks to everybody to make sure it gets in before the end of the year. And so, you know, I don't know, some point we decided we were going to open a donor advised fund. And for us, it was a no-brainer to open it at, you know, LGBTQ foundation, community foundation. So we opened it at Horizons. And, you know, I think that the thing, I'm a financial advisor, and I opened it at a, you know, at a community foundation as opposed to like Fidelity or some, you know, other commercial retail organization. And part of that was, I have to pay a fee to have a donor advised fund. I want that fee to go to the community. I don't want it to go to a bunch of people making profit. So for me, it was a really not a hard decision to say, I want a donor advised fund. Donor advised fund for me has made it easier to give. Any time of the year, I just send a little email, and next thing I know, my check is out. So it's a lot less for me to do. And I think my giving has increased because of it, because it's forced me to be organized in a way that I never was before. So I think, so for us, our major vehicle is through our donor advised fund, is where we do most of our giving. Personally, how do we choose our organizations? A lot of them are very personal to us. We've been affected by them or seen the work they've done to help our communities. So that's what really drives our decisions about that. And I'm assuming that drives everybody's decisions. I'm hearing a lot of feedback. Are you guys getting feedback? No, okay, must be me. So I'm trying to see if so the main thing for me is there's nobody doing the work that OuRight does. So it's pretty far on the top of my list of organizations that I give to and will leave money to. And initially they were in my will, and then they were in my trust, and now they're actually in my donor advised fund as you know, one of the charities that will get whatever's left over. And I don't know. So for me, it's really been about, and again, I want to give where people don't give. So I think that a lot of the organizations that I give to are organizations that a lot of people don't think about. And so I continue to want to support organizations that a lot of people in the world don't think of giving to, and hopefully lead by example. So I don't think I look or sound like somebody, you know, I don't come from money, but I always felt that I had to give a check to somebody. People give to their churches, I give to my nonprofits. And so for me, it's always been about community and supporting the community. And I don't know if there's any community that gives, you know, has such a wide selection of folks that give, and maybe not at the large amounts, but I think that in the LGBTQ community, we support our organizations. And we need to continue to do that. And I really am excited to see the legacy giving starting at Eaglehawk. It's been around for 30 years. And, you know, I may not be around for the next 30 years, but I have a feeling that we will not have solved the problems of the world in the next 30 years. And I feel like if there's somebody going to be there to solve them, it's going to be that OuRight is going to be in that group of folks doing the work. So in the end, it's really about, I don't have all the time to give to all the organizations, but today I can write a little bigger check, or I can think about what I can leave to them. So for me, the donor advised fund has been the way to go. And, you know, just listening to Peter, I feel like I need to start thinking about the Charitable Remainder Trust, because it sounds like an interesting idea too.
Thank you.
So
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tom and Dipti, for those stories and your support of OuRight. It means the world, I know, to all of us who care about this work. We have only a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to check and see if there were any questions from folks attending. We did get one question, which was, is there a minimum amount to commit to the Outstanding Legacy Circle in order to qualify for the match. Katie, do you have the answer to that?
No, is the answer to that. Yes, we're just looking for people to share that they have joined or are joining the Outstanding Legacy Circle. And the type of planned gift that you make and the amount you make is entirely up to you. And in fact, it's entirely up to you whether you want to share that information with us. But we just are looking for people to opt in to joining the circle, and Paul has been very clear and kind in his desire to encourage that and recognize people for doing that, no matter what amount they decide to include in their estate planning.
So I wanted to add something here, and just I did say that I would share what I have done, but I thought I would be a little bit more specific. I said that it's one of my top 3 organizations we're going to leave money to, and so we're 50% of my assets are going to go to charity, and a third of it will go to OuRight. I keep calling it Eaglehurk because I'm still got that name stuck in my head. But a third of it will go to OuRight, and a third of it will go to other Asian American organizations, and a third of it will go to Horizons Community Foundation.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Dipti. I know we're running close to time, so if folks have particular questions that they want answered about the Legacy program, please feel free to reach out to Katie. Katie, if you could put your email in the, I know everyone has it, but there's also information on the website which she's put in, or if you have specific questions, you can email directly with Katie. Dipti, I just want to say thank you for making that a public pledge. That's so exciting that you are thinking about OuRight as you're thinking about your estate. And thanks again to Paul for setting up that match for folks who are going to join the Legacy Circle. Please join us for OutSummit, which is December 9th through 11th, and you can find information at outsummit.org. And I also just want to recognize that we have a fellow board member on the Zoom this morning, Jeff Natter. Hi, Jeff. Jeff also has joined the Outstanding Legacy Circle, so thank you, Jeff. And I want to just turn it